Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Nepal Institute of International Cooperation and Engagement, I welcome you all to the International Young Scholars Summit 2020. I extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished chair for the session, Dr. Rachit Murarka, fellow scholars and participants who have joined us through Zoom and are watching this live on YouTube. We are glad to witness your presence today. The International Forum aims to bring together rigorous and erudite young scholars from all around the world over a single platform. The aim is to create an academic space to encourage young scholars and academicians from the field of international relations, political science, diplomacy, public policy, administration, and related subfields. The conference will be held for 3 days consecutively. This is the second day of the conference, and we will have 30 different sessions with 2 sessions running parallelly throughout in white and green rooms. The conference will feature 275 scholars from 25 different countries who will be delivering their presentations and sharing their understanding on various topics with us. The session is streaming live on our YouTube, so please feel free to share it on your social media handles with the hashtag IYSS2020. This is the 14th session of the conference, and to chair and moderate the session, it's a real pleasure to have with us Dr. Rachit Murarka, Assistant Professor, Kathmandu School of Law, Nepal. He pursued his PhD from Center for West Asian Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and International Relations from JNU. His research interests include international economics, energy security, international finance, West Asian political developments, and international law. Sir, it's an honor to have you here. It's a great pleasure, and without any further ado, I'd like to request you to take the session forward. Thank you. Okay, sir. So can we have the first speaker, please? The first speaker that we have on the list is Mr. Waseem. And all the speakers will be given a total of 8 minutes, and the ones exceeding will be muted. So I request everyone to kindly stay in the time limit provided, because we have to complete the entire session within 100 minutes, and the rest of the time will be provided for the discussion. So Mr. Waseem, the floor is all yours for the next 8 minutes, and I'll be muting you after the 8 minutes. Thank you, sir.
Hello, everyone. This is Waseem Bhat, a research fellow, University of Kashmir. I'm very thankful to Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement for organizing the International Young Scholars Summit 2020. And it provided me an opportunity to be part of this wonderful conference. I should be very thankful to this institute. The theme that I am going to speak on is COVID-19, the quest for collective human security. The best, I think I have given you the this PPT. Can you please share it? Will you please share it?
Yes, sir. We're just sharing it in a while. Krishna, are you there?
Okay, thank you. The best definition that I found regarding this human security is that human security means that has been given by the United Nations Development Program, is that human security means first safety from such chronic threats as hunger, disease, repression, also protection from sudden hurtful disruptions in the patterns of daily life, whether in homes, in jobs, or in communities. So human security focuses on the core issues of individual needs. And coming to my first slide, next please. Yeah, I have divided my slide. The first that I have given the outline of what I'm going to talk about is the scenario, what are the implications of COVID-19 on the security concern in the world. Number second that I am going to put or highlight is security threat, traditional and non-traditional, how traditional security has been a dominant discourse in international politics. And number third, that will be how to mitigate the security threats. Coming to the first one, that is the scenario, the socio-economic impacts of COVID-19. As we all know that the COVID-19 has affected each and every aspect of life, be it social, political, or economic. It's not just a human or a health crisis, but also a political and security challenge. And being human, we are connected to each other, but the social distance and staying home has heavily challenged the socio-economic structure of the world. And this section of society is being challenged, whether the elites or the poor, the marginalized sections, the vulnerable sections of the society. Everyone has been challenged to a greater extent by these deadly crisis. And according to a report given by International Labour Organization, that 5 to 25 million people might lose their job in the world, especially the working class, working in the workers working in informal sector. And more importantly, it might be a catastrophe for the migrant workers in India or the workers in India. It is estimated that 40 crore people or workers might lose their job in India only. And one of the most important thing that I think in this presentation is that UNESCO, according to UNESCO report, 1.5 billion students are out of school, and it has been found out and highlighted that when the students are out of school because of the summer vacations for normally 10 to 15 days or for a month, and when they are rejoining the classrooms, they tend to forget how to read English and how to do the maths. And coming to the context of the COVID-19 regarding the school closures, how it would challenge the student community, especially the school children, that when they will resume the classwork after 6 or 8 months, and how it would turn out for them. It will be a great challenge, not only for India, but for the whole world, because students tend to forget maths and reading English in 15 days, and how it could turn in 6 to 8 months. And one more important thing that I'm highlighting is that WTO has reported that 20 to 30%, there might be 20 to 30% decline in international arrivals. And we all know that there is hardly any movement of people or goods from or across the world or between or among the countries, and which has ultimately put the GDP all over the world in a sort of a crisis. And currently, India is at minus 23. Next, please. Okay. Talking about the security threats, we all know that the traditional security threats have always been a dominant discourse in international politics, because from 1945 onwards, the states have hugely or heavily invested in nuclear weapons and all those sort of things, where they tend to put more emphasis and more money on state sovereignty and territorial integrity. But the security is not only of states and tightening your borders. You have to keep your people in consideration, because when we talk about the non-traditional security threats, they have been to some extent they have been hugely ignored or neglected, because non-traditional security threats are the people in the world are dying more because of starvation, famines, epidemics, pandemics, climate change, etc., etc. Or what we can call is non-military threats. More people are dying in the world, especially in Asian and African continents. So states should provide more, should go for more investments in non-traditional security threats vis-a-vis the traditional security threats, and that's how I think development could be made and states can progress. And we all know that non-traditional security threats have hardly received any attention, and though it should be the most important concern for states, as it plays a vital role in making developmental process. So more people, as I have already discussed, that more people die of starvation, this bad working conditions, unavailability of clean drinking water, pollution, etc. Had the states put their money on the non-traditional security threats, the situation could have been it could have been totally a different situation right now. And one more important thing that that I'm going to discuss is in this presentation, though because of the duration of time, I have cut short my presentation to just 3 or 4 slides. So number next, please. Yeah, thank you. How to mitigate the security threats. Now, I believe all states must make proper investments in dealing with non-traditional security threats so that lives can be saved. Because once the proper investment in non-traditional security threats like health or whenever such crises, starvation, climate change, epidemics or pandemics, whenever such crises occur in the future, we can have sufficient resources so that we can mitigate, we can neglect, or we can restrict the threat to some extent. I'm not arguing here that we can stop it completely. We can restrict those crises forever. No, but to some extent it can play a positive role once the states or non-state actors are investing more in non-traditional security threats, and once they take it as a serious challenge. One more important thing is that a more stronger and proactive role must be played by the international bodies like the United Nations, because they can in order to mobilize the resources and direct the limited resources to the most vulnerable sections, because there are regions in Asia and in African continent especially, even although there are certain areas in Europe as well where we have to where the states are finding it really difficult to meet the needs of the people. So when there will be the more proactive role played by the states and bodies like international organizations or some regional organization can take initiatives like the ASEAN or SAARC or European Union and other regional organizations in mitigating such threats in future. And I think COVID-19 as a security threat has provided states and international organizations an opportunity to revisit their policies and programs for the betterment of world community, because these are the crises, these crises have shaken the whole world. It has crossed all the borders, and it has not remained limited to a particular state, though it originated in a particular state, but it has not been limited to that very state. It has gone to each and every corner of the world and has affected each and every section of society, every section of community, every section of the world. So it will be a really great thing if states and non-state actors and especially the nations could revisit their policies and make stronger policies as far as the traditional or non-traditional security threats are concerned, because non-traditional security threats kill more people than wars and conflicts. That has been researched, that has been found out by number of scholars. And
wrap up, please.
Okay, I'm just concluding. And Winston Churchill once said that never waste good crisis, because it may not be, yes, COVID-19 may not be a good crisis, but it can be a blessing in disguise to some extent, where states could take recourse to highlight their investments, to maintain their investments, and to go for the investments in non-traditional security threats. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Rachit, so before you take over, I'd like to welcome you because you weren't there when we started the session. Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure.
No, I had just an internet problem.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. That's okay. I was just welcoming you. And before we move further, I'd like to introduce the next speaker, and sir, you can take the session forward. The next speaker we have is Miss Aditi Chakraborty. She is the research assistant at the University of Dhaka, Bangladesh, and the topic of her presentation is how does COVID-19 reignite Islamophobia in India? Ma'am, you've got 8 minutes on the floor. Thank you.
Will you invite Pulkit?
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Yes, sir, Pulkit. Can you start?
Sir, I'm sharing my screen. Just a minute.
Okay. Take your time.
Is it visible, sir?
Not yet. Yeah, it's visible.
Okay.
So the Pulkit's paper is on escaping violence. India, Hindus and Sikhs of Afghanistan. He is a research scholar from University of Gujarat. Okay, Pulkit, go ahead.
Thank you so much, sir. My topic is escaping violence, Hindus and Sikhs of Afghanistan. So as we all know, Afghanistan is a landlocked country of South Asia. It is predominantly a Muslim country and is home to non-Muslim minorities also, like Hindus and Sikhs. They constitute about 0.3 of the population, and they majorly belong from trading communities like Aroda and Khatris. As far as their historical roots is concerned, their references could be found in texts like under Ghaznavi rulers, they lived as Dhimmi or called as protected people. Ibn Battuta's account also talks about Nath Yogis' presence in Afghanistan. And similarly, Babarnama describes Gor Khatri temples in Old Peshawar. On the other hand, Sikhism could be traced back to Janam Sakhi's description of Guru Nanak's visit to areas like Makkah, Baghdad, and Kabul. There were also some areas where conflicts happened between the major and minority communities, like the Mizils, which is a Sikh confederacy that put a strong defense against the plundering forces of Dali. They were also politically active quite as well as and participated actively, like Mangal Singh Bedi and Jai Singh Fani. They were quite active in 1925 Loya Jirga or their parliament. Then after the rise of Taliban, tension really started in Afghanistan, and 1970s because of successive assassination of presidents like Daud Khan and his successor. And Afghanistan soon became a theater of Cold War politics. After the withdrawal of USSR, Mujahideen forces captured Kabul in 1992 and ousted Najibullah. Then at that time, Afghani Hindus and Sikhs left Afghanistan and moved to India. Lawlessness could be exemplified by Jalalabad and Tanda attack in 1998. There were also cases of endemic discrimination. At that time, under the Aab Gang scheme, both communities came to India. They were discriminated and had to pay jizya that time. Then moving on to the next slide. After the in the post-2001 time, after the defeat of Taliban by Northern Alliance, rebuilding took place under Karzai government. And at that moment, 25 Afghani Sikh and Hindus moved back to Afghanistan. And their initial years were quite peaceful. But the problem soon started as the warlords have joined the government and illegal seizure of properties took place. And in various incidents, in various killings, Sikh and Hindus got killed. In 2018, like recently Jalalabad attack, 15 Sikhs and 4 Hindus got killed. Also, somehow their leadership was also targeted in some situation. On the other hand, their economic situation has also exacerbated. And once they used to be affluent trading communities, but now they are reduced to trade in herbal medicine and spices only. So their trade ratio has also decreased. The recent 25th March 2020 attack became an igniting point again when some IS government targeted Har Rai Sahib Gurdwara and in Kabul and killed around 25 people. So from 2 lakh until 1970s, there are now only 700 left in Afghanistan. As far as the international response is concerned to the situation, Canada has responded. The Canada-Indian Foundation urged Indian government to take some to accept Afghan Sikh and Hindus. In July 2020, 25 Canadian MPs requested their immigration minister to facilitate a special program under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act to bring Afghani Hindus and Sikhs to Canada. Similarly, in USA, 20 senators urged the administration to grant emergency refugee protection to both the communities in Afghanistan. They had also asked the state to prioritize resettlement opportunities and under the US refugee admission program. In terms of India, around 18,000 are already residing, and 50 to 60% have acquired Indian citizenship. Rest are refugees or on long-term visas. After the recent Kabul attack in March, Indian government fastened the visa process to around 600 people. But the praise for this initiative was short-lived because, as you all know, Afghanis, those were already residing in India for last 30 years, they started demanding citizenship in the wake of Citizenship Amendment Act 2019. Now, currently, in the context of COVID, they are living in a perplexed situation as many don't have refugee status, and COVID has further added to their misery. I have shortened all my content. So to conclude, the way ahead should be that this is an opportunity for South Asia to act at a regional level, as it has around more than 2.5 million refugees. Although there are some critical junctures in South Asia for refugee protection, like South Asia Declaration on Refugees, but there was no legal obligation on that. Some scholars have argued that we must develop a regional framework like OAU that was developed in 1969, and it should be supplemented with some domestic legislation. Many have seen SARC COVID fund as a first step towards it, but we never know. And at the Asia Pacific level, institutions were there like APC or the Intergovernment Pacific Consultation on Refugees, which was supported by and backed by both UNHCR and IOM. It included both Afghanistan, India, Pak, Iraq, and an effort can be made to revive such institution or to make a new institution on such grounds. And its mandate was more inclusive and included refugees, displaced persons, irregular migrants, and trafficking. It is no more active, but we can make an effort to revive it or establish a new collaboration on such terms to at least initiate a dialogue at a much broader term and at an inclusive level. Thank you. So you are not audible.
You are well within your time, so you have 1 or 2 more minutes. So you'd like to conclude more or have to add something more?
Sir, I have already concluded it. I have already shortened the whole thing.
Okay, fine. Okay, we'll come back to you on question answer session. Aditi, are you ready now? Okay, fine. We'll move to Pintu.
Okay, sir. Firstly, good afternoon to all and all the scholars presented here. The Spurned community. So well, an upshot that has come to be known as the Rohingya crisis is a mishap that was in the making for over several decades, and that derails the precarious situation of the thousands of people belonging to the Rohingya Muslim minority community in the Myanmar Rakhine state. So here, Myanmar does not decipher the community as its citizen and ruminates them as an illegal migrant from the Bangladesh. And the UN has described the order against the Rohingya community as a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. So here the crisis has acquired a security dimension, with the perturbation being raised over the regal of Islamic extremism amongst the Rohingyas. So here, who have grown increasingly forlorn over their precarious situation. So the massive refugee outflow has spawned a serious humanitarian crisis that has entails the implication on regional stability and the security. So I will not go after the so much history. We know that the history of Rakhine state was a part of Arakan kingdom. So here I will just put my views on the 2 things. That is the human right violation and abuses, and secondly, that is the international response. So on the very first part, the human right violation and abuses are worsening in the Myanmar. So this crisis has given a way to massive human right violation and the humanitarian crisis. The armed conflict between the military and the ethnic group in the northern Myanmar has intensified, forcing several 100,000s to flee to Bangladesh and other places. As we know that over 8 lakh Rohingyas fled Myanmar between the 2016 and the 2017, as the military waged a genocidal campaign wheeled as a counterinsurgency against the civil population. And here the UN fact-finding mission determined that the military action in the Shan and the Kachin state since 2011 amounted to the genocide, war crimes against the humanity. So well, in this case, the repatriation of the Rohingya population. So in this legal condition for the repatriation seems to be far from acceptable. So in this framework of the agreement signed between the Bangladesh and the Myanmar, particularly, they deeply despise the flawed process of the national verification card. So considering it, they view it as a perpetuation of the discriminatory 1982 citizenship law, so which has effectively left them stateless in their own country. So Rohingyas are facing restriction on the marriage, family planning, employment, education, religious choices, the freedom of movement. So they require permission for everything. So after this, I will move on the second point. So here the major concern is that the violence against the Muslim women and the girls. So the violence which is denied by the Myanmar, of course, and the Rohingya women and the girls have been victim in the recent decades of grave and the repugnant violence. So which is committed by the security forces in the Myanmar. So basically the arrest, torture, rape, widespread killings, forced labor, other severe abuses are resulting in the waves of mass displacement. So now we will move on the second part, that is the international responses. So here, although this crisis has focused on the regional stability and security implication, but the affected community requires a lot of attention in terms of their stable place to live. So nearly all the neighboring countries are only seeing this crisis through the security lenses. So here attempting to compete with each other, China, India and Japan are supporting Myanmar and called for the international community to avoid criticizing the Myanmar government because they have their own concerns. Ultimately, it may be, economic concern and national security concerns. Okay. So here I am ending my part by saying that some countries are seeing this crisis as a security threat to them, and some are seeing these issues as a matter of the violation of human rights of Rohingyas. But there is no proper home for the Rohingya refugees. So this is we have to understand this worsened their livelihood day by day. Few months back, as we talk that around January 2020. So Myanmar government established a panel to probe the allegations of abuses in the Rakhine state in 2017. The panel blamed Rohingyas for attacking the police post and provoking crackdown. So here in this, whole gamut of wrong and right, powerless people are so much affected, and this requires, from my side, urgent well-established solutions. So here I am ending my speech. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Pintu. It was short, crisp, and nice. Meanwhile, you just think about the answer why you have chosen China, Japan, and India, and not the affected state like Bangladesh, India, Nepal, and other neighboring countries in your presentation. Meanwhile, think about it. We'll come to you later.
Yeah, of
Now,
course, sir, of
next,
course.
Ahmad. Are you ready, Ahmad? Ahmad?
So he's not audible. I look into it. Probably I can get in touch.
Ahmad is not there. Aditi, is she ready? Why don't we count Samanneeta?
Sir, she will not be present due to certain personal issues. She wouldn't be there.
Okay, then Saman.
Sir, shall I start?
Yeah, you can.
All right, sir. Thank you. So today
You
I'm
are a
going
research
to
assistant at India Scholar. Okay, fine, international scholar.
National Scholar, yes, sir. So today I'm going to be essentially talking about how women and girls have borne the disproportionate impact of the Rohingya crisis. So we know that a humanitarian crisis is rarely gender neutral. However, women and girls are always the disproportionate bearers of any crisis, and the case of Myanmar is no exception to that. Since 2012, as we know it, they have repeatedly become the targets of the armed forces of Myanmar because of what their gender embodies in the genocidal campaign. They also face an additional crisis. As refugees, they experience gender-based violence within the makeshift camps in Bangladesh as well. Domestic violence, sexual abuse, and forced marriages are norm in a country where they have chosen to seek refuge. Now, the United Nations has attested to the veracity of claims alleging gross human rights violations by the members of the armed forces. In fact, an independent fact-finding mission which assessed and provided a comprehensive view of this crisis claim that there is widespread and systematic killing of women and girls. There is also a systematic selection of women and girls of reproductive ages to rape. Victims are so severely injured that they may be unable to have sexual intercourse with their partners or be able to conceive children. The events in Myanmar thus have been rightly categorized as war crimes and crimes against humanity. Also, the barbarity and violence that is witnessed highlights a pertinent fact that there is a cultural acceptance of the need to obliterate the presence of the Rohingya, which is widespread among the majority populace. Now, when we trace the extent of war crimes committed, we have to remind ourselves of how the armed forces have often left cigarette burns and carvings engraved with sharp knives all over the naked bodies of their victims. Their sexual enslavement and forced marriages to abusers are also well-documented facts. Girls as young as 7 years old have had their hands and hair tied to trees while armed forces have gang raped them. Often to inflict further psychological trauma, the perpetrators of sexual violence gang raped girls or genitally mutilated them in front of their family members who stood by helpless with no recourse to protect their daughters and wives. Now, the abuse inflicted on women and girls, like in the case of other conflicts like the Rwandan and the Bosnian genocides, is a strategic military tactic. Since a patriarchal societies often associate women with the honor and dignity of the communities of which they are part of, the warring parties are often driven by the objective to rape the women in order to humiliate and derogate the communities into compliance. Now, Razia Sultan is an important advocating on behalf of the Rohingya community. And she talks about how violence is not about individual sexual desire. It's a group effort. It's not just rape, rather it's a weapon to punish the community. Now, I'd like to shift the focus to how violence is being committed against the women in the refugee camps as well. The Rohingya refugees have fled to Bangladesh as a result of the continuing violence in their homeland. However, women and girls were destined for further acts of violence. This time, the perpetrators did not sport a military uniform. Instead, they were members of the refugee community or sexual predators who trafficked the vulnerable victims in the Cox's Bazar. Now, feminist studies have often shown that in the event of a crisis, if a cisgender man fails to fulfill his societal role of acting as a provider for the family, his masculinity enters a period of crisis. The trauma that results from it has far-reaching implications for the female family members. In many cases, men have directed abuse against the non-members as well. Sexual aggression is the most common form of physical abuse that occurs as a result of this crisis. Moreover, women have, there is also a reversal of gender roles as we know it. Women have taken up menial labor to support the family, while men now take up household chores. As a result of the increased humiliation that the Rohingya men experience, it culminates into domestic violence and threats against women. In fact, over 80% of violence against the women is what we can term as intimate partner violence. Now, the analysis does make it abundantly clear that women and girls have borne the disproportionate impact of the crisis, which has its genesis in Myanmar. To be precise, it's nothing short of a genocide. The vulnerable section of the Rohingya community is a victim of multifaceted forms of violence occurring in their homeland and in the refugee camps as well. We know that the Gambia has brought about a case against the state of Myanmar at the ICJ. In fact, Netherlands, the Maldives, and Canada have also joined the appeal. 2 members of the armed forces have even been brought in front of the court to the ICJ. But that isn't enough. Until the permanent members of the UNSC take decisive actions against the ongoing genocide, the repercussions of it would be worse than what the international community witnessed in the 1990s during the Bosnian and the Rwandan genocides, as it stood on the margins of the society, allowing countless people to be slaughtered, raped, and expelled from their homes. Unfortunately, the response of the international community leaves much to be desired. The analysis of the fallout of the crisis has completely disregarded the differential impact on the women and girls. Arguably, the international actors must adopt a female-centric policy to create a holistic framework for resolving the crisis in Myanmar and Bangladesh. It is prerequisite for the Burmese society to achieve a durable and just peace. Moreover, the government officials in Bangladesh must guarantee the security of women and girls within the refugee camps. They must also extend the rights of female refugees to access adequate healthcare services easily. In fact, the creation of alternative employment opportunities, because numerous girls and women have been forced to enter prostitution, would be liberated if they are provided alternative means to sustain their livelihoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Saman. This was a very short one, nice. But like, let me ask you one thing. As you have said it earlier also, like, more or less it has same with the women everywhere. It is nothing unique to the Rohingyas.
Yes.
Like everywhere women said the same thing.
Yes.
So like, don't you think it's an implicit support from the international community? Because Gambia, a non-connected country, has to bring in the case.
Yes.
Whereas all the permanent members or the affected members like Bangladesh, India, Nepal, they are not. So is it the natural resources of Myanmar is helping them to hide their crime? Just think about it. We can come to you later. Ahmad, are you there?
Yeah. Am I audible, sir?
Perfectly audible. So, are you ready with the presentation?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you are a lecturer at Kabul University.
Yes.
So, okay, very good. All the best. Go on.
Thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Let me first of all take this opportunity to thank NICE, or Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement, for providing us this opportunity to talk or to express our views regarding our interested issues. The topic which I would like to talk about is the growth of terrorism in South Asia and Afghanistan's perspective about it. Because of the shortage of time, I go straight on my presentation. Since 2001, Afghanistan, terrorism as a non-traditional security threat has been growing in South Asia rapidly. From Afghanistan's perspective, it has domestic, regional, and global dimensions. Here, I just want to first explain the reasons behind the rapid growth of terrorism in South Asia. Then I will try to elaborate that terrorism is the enemy of all of us. And last, I will propose a fundamental and comprehensive solution to fight terrorism. Let me summarize my views into 3 points. First, there is an assessment that terrorism is growing, its capabilities, its violence, and its determination to fight us all. But the question is, why is it growing? After all of those sacrifices that we have made together, most countries in the world, particularly South Asian countries, have been either directly fighting terrorism, like Afghanistan, or in one way or another involved to support counterterrorism over the past at least 2 decades. But still we see growth in their capabilities. From Afghanistan's perspective, the reasons are, number one, terrorism is used as a state foreign policy, or terrorism is used as a foreign policy instrument. It cannot be defeated unless states decide not to sponsor terrorism. In order to clarify this issue, I would like to mention an instance. The NDS, or the National Directorate of Security, which is Afghanistan's main intelligence agency, has recently captured and killed 3 most senior ISK, or Islamic State Khorasan's leaders in Afghanistan. Abdullah Urugzai, also known as Aslam Faruqi, the leader of IS for Afghanistan, he was captured on 5th of May 2020. He is a terrorist of a Pakistani origin. 2. Ziaul Haq, also known as Abu Umar Khorasani, the leader of IS for South and East Asia, he was captured on 11th of May 2020. And Asadullah Urugzai, the head of IS intelligence, he was killed on 2nd of August 2020 during an encounter with Afghan national security forces. He was also a terrorist of a Pakistani origin. So there is too much solid and accurate evidence that shows Pakistan's establishment is involved in sponsoring and supporting terrorism in Afghanistan and India, particularly in this region, to gain its interest. Number 2, terrorism has sanctuaries, hideout places. It cannot be defeated unless these sanctuaries are eliminated. As far as Afghanistan case is concerned, the Taliban, which is the main terrorist and insurgency group fighting against the legitimate and elected government of Afghanistan, has sanctuaries inside Pakistan. Their 2 main councils and decision-making centers are in Quetta and in Peshawar. Quetta is the capital city of Balochistan, and Peshawar is the capital city of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, 2 major provinces of Pakistan. In fact, their councils' names are Quetta Council and Peshawar Council. Number 3, terrorism has financing sources. The government are paying them money. They're getting money from illegal human trafficking, from drug trafficking, from extortions, from illegal mining, and etc., etc. So we cannot deprive terrorism from its operational assets and capabilities unless these financing sources are dried up. And finally, there is a new political and security dynamics in the region that has led to the growth of new terrorist actors, including IS Daesh. Now, Daesh was never a phenomenon in Afghanistan, but it has come to Afghanistan. So a regional problem and a global problem continues to affect Afghanistan. My second point, terrorism is the enemy of all of us. It is not just the enemy of one country. In order to elaborate on this, I would like to give an example. Afghan Taliban or Haqqani network may be having Afghan agenda. TTP has a country-specific agenda in Pakistan. LET has a specific agenda in India. ETIM or East Turkestan Islamic Movement has a specific agenda in China. However, Al-Qaeda, Daesh, or Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan have regional and global agendas. While we are fighting all of these terrorist networks in Afghanistan, they indeed have country-specific and regional and global agendas. So let's not make a mistake. The terrorism is the problem of one country. It is not. It is the enemy of all of us. And let me clarify one issue here, that sometimes people try to trace Islamic origins for terrorism. This is not true. No people has suffered more than Muslims at the hands of terrorism. It has nothing to do with Islam. It is the enemy of Islam. It's the enemy of our civilization. We are losing every day, on average, 30 people to terrorism. Afghanistan has been an Islamic country for centuries. So the issue is not about the Islam. The issue is about political, criminal, and ideological problems of elements that are opposed to our civilization. My final point. Dear friends, fighting terrorism, while we have a common enemy now, but we do not have a common strategy to defeat that enemy. We don't have it in this region, in South Asia, and I'm not sure we have it at a global level. If there is one way to defeat this terrorism, and that's to develop a regional consensus and develop a regional, a global, a comprehensive counter-terrorism strategy. Fighting terrorism cannot be achieved just by a military strategy alone. We need a comprehensive strategy, combining our political, diplomatic, military, economic, and informational assets. That's what we require to do in Afghanistan and in this region at large. In addition to this, economic growth and economic integration in the region is a key enabler for nations to fight terrorism. As we know better, South Asia is the least connected region in the world. So connectivity, economic integration, and economic interdependence are the most important factors to create a common positive interest among the nations. And that common positive interest, I'm sure, will lead the South Asian nations to fight terrorism genuinely. I know there is a lot to talk about. I thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ahmad. Like too much of inside account, we would have never known about it, like all this terrorist organization and like what have done by the ISI and those things. But however, one problem, like the most difficult task about terrorism, dealing with terrorism, is defining terrorism. International law is grappling with it. Like they are not yet come to a acceptable definition of terrorism that can be accepted by everyone. Like for me, who is a freedom fighter, can be terrorist for the government.
Mm-hmm.
So like in this regard, like we're defining the term itself is a very problematic thing. We have not come to a acceptable definition, global acceptable definition. So
Yeah.
like how can you can say then there's a comprehensive fight and those things, like it's difficult for, I guess. So just think over it, like you don't have a definitional clarity of terrorism. So in
so
that
you want me
case,
to
how can
answer
you
it
fight
now or
with
maybe later on?
No, no, maybe later. Like just see, I just want to think about this question.
You mean the question is what is the definition of terrorism?
Yeah, exactly. So we can come to it later.
Yeah.
So, Manjima, are you ready?
Yes, am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible, Manjima.
I'll be sharing my screen.
Yeah, Manjima.
Is it visible?
Yes.
Right, good afternoon. So I will be presenting on refugee crisis and inequitable sharing of responsibilities. Before I begin, I would like to thank NICE Nepal for presenting me with this wonderful opportunity. So thank you. Refugee crisis. Yes. So UNHCR Global Trends reported 79.5 million forcibly displaced people worldwide at the end of 2019, of which 26 million were refugees. 73% of these refugees are hosted by their neighboring countries, most of which lack the right kind of resources to provide adequate assistance to refugees. COVID-19 has made it more important than ever to have access to social security and protection of rights by the state to survive the pandemic. And hence, in this context, it becomes very important for us to look into the plight of refugees and stateless people, to understand who takes up the responsibility of protecting refugees, and to analyze what are the international efforts to aid them, which we will be going through during this presentation. So before I jump into the topic, I'd like to paint a picture on the plight of refugees. The decade 2010 to 19 was marked as the decade of displacement because 1 in 6 people worldwide were displaced at the end of 2019. Now, the COVID-19 has disproportionately affected refugees, internally displaced people, asylum seekers, and migrant workers who were already vulnerable in the pre-COVID world. 164 countries closed their borders to fight the pandemic, and in many of these countries, civil liberties are suppressed. So where do refugees stand today? Refugees are stranded without citizenship rights in poor living conditions. They are more vulnerable to catching coronavirus and are least likely to be cured. Resettlement programs aimed at giving refugees a permanent home in third countries. These programs are on standstill. The countries that currently host refugees are exhausting their capacity to look after refugees since their own economies are wrecked and their own job markets are finding it hard to provide jobs to their own population. So in this context, the future of refugees is more perilous than ever. So here comes the question of who is bearing the brunt of refugee crisis. The developing countries host 85% of world's refugees, while the least developed countries provide asylum to 27% of the total. This points out how the impact of refugee crisis is disproportionately distributed, heavily biased to favor the wealthier economies, which are quite ironically better capable of dealing with the crisis. 10 countries host more than half of world's refugees, with all of them, except Germany, being middle or low-income countries. Turkey has topped the charts of hosting refugees by hosting 3.6 million refugees, followed by Pakistan and Uganda with 1.4 million each. These are the UNHCR statistics of 2019. So these host countries are developing countries, and they are straining under resource scarcity and political constraints. While what is more alarming is the shift in perspectives and policies towards accommodation of refugees in the developed countries, which have turned more hostile. So developed countries aid in solving refugee crisis mainly in two ways. First is by allowing resettlement of refugees, and second is through providing financial aid to the host countries. As we can see, less than 1% of refugees were resettled each year from first countries of asylum to permanent homes in new countries. In EU, borders are coming down. External frontier is becoming more militarized. Legal routes are being truncated. Penalties are imposed on transport companies, and EU is paying its neighbors like Turkey, Libya, and Niger to keep the refugees and migrants away. So when the circumstances have turned unfavorable, refugees and migrants have often turned into dangerous routes like sea routes to reach developed countries. And we are often hearing news of these boats capsizing and killing many. And EU is not alone to blame here. US administration has planned to slash the cap of resettlement from 30,000 to 18,000 last year. And I would like to make a note here that this number was never below 70,000 even after the 9/11 crisis. So less than 5% of global resettlement needs were met in 2019. With the pandemic wrecking economies worldwide, the contribution of developed countries in aiding refugees as well as the host countries remain capricious and is subject to political will and popular mood. Now, what are multilateral institutions doing in this context? By multilateral institutions, I'm mainly referring to UN and UNHCR here. So a landmark in making global refugee regime more equitable and fair was the New York Declaration of Refugees and Migrants in 2016, which set out the elements of comprehensive refugee response framework and a path for its application in the form of Global Compact on Refugees. The Global Compact on Refugees was hailed as a minor miracle. Why? Because the highlights of the compact include provisions of financial aid and trade deals for the countries hosting refugees, increase in number of channels to provide for resettlement of refugees in third countries, like private and community sponsorship resettlement programs, measures to improve responses at local level in host countries where refugees first arrive, and programs to build self-reliance among the refugee population. All these measures would eventually culminate in making the global refugee regime much more fair. Now, how is it being implemented? By the end of 2018, CRRF were rolled out in 15 countries. World Bank has provided $2 billion to low-income countries hosting large number of refugees, and Global Refugee Forum was held on January 2020, which drew almost 3,000 participants across the globe. There is, of course, room for improvement. The document is not legally binding, allowing developed countries to shrug off responsibilities. It also defines access of refugees to asylum in third country based on their economic productivity rather than due to the collective responsibility of countries which have committed themselves to the United Nations agenda of human rights. So that is a problematic way to look at resettlement programs. So there is room for improvement. Next is path to progress. What can be done? I always hold the opinion that refugee crisis is not a problem of staggering numbers. It's a problem of poor allocation of resources and inefficient policies. And the key to solving refugee crisis is collective action. Wealthier nations must actively engage with the refugee population and host countries instead of looking inwards and giving in to rising populism and protectionism. The potential of refugees to contribute to the economy must not be the only criteria for resettlement. They must exist alongside legal protection, which should be guaranteed to all refugees despite their skills, because after all, we are talking about human rights here. Skilling and building of self-reliance among refugees must be pursued. Unbiased solutions like resettlement quotas based on country's GDP must be examined. A country with higher GDP is definitely capable of providing more assistance to the refugees, and they must engage in more resettlement. Every state must fulfill their commitment to human rights agenda, while multilateral institutions like UNHCR must come up with and implement effective and binding solutions. No one leaves home until home is the mouth of shark. Refugees are a symbol of courage and perseverance, and it's our responsibility to give them a better day to wake up to. Thank you.
Thank you, Manjima. I just like to ask you a question. Like recently, yesterday only, there was a report from Brown's University that US war on terror has displaced 37 million people worldwide. So when you talk about responsibilities, so like, shouldn't we be directly held US responsible for all this? Why you have to collectivize the responsibility? So just, 1 minute. Who else is left? Aditi, are you ready? Aditi? So shall we open the floor? Aditi, are you ready? Can you hear me? We can't hear you. We can't hear you. Paki, what to do about Aditi?
So would you just mind giving me a minute? I'll get in touch with her somehow. I'll try. Otherwise, we'll have to reschedule her.
So should you open the floor for the question answer?
Yes, so you may proceed with the question answer round, and if her mic starts working, I'll let you know, and then we can have her.
Okay. There were some excellent presentations. Like I have learned quite a few things. Like There are many inside accounts. I didn't know much about things. So it was a learning experience for me myself. But however, I have some qualms, like most of you are focused on the same traditional threat. Like now COVID is there in the picture, so COVID is all over there, but most of you have done terrorism, refugees and those things. But like non-traditional threat, the most of them like climate change. If you ask me, Syrian refugee crisis is largely a result of climate change as well. So no one has dealt about the climate. In fact, the crisis of COVID, it will be further exacerbated by the climate change. The WHO is saying that COVID is not the last one. In future, we will see more of this sort of pandemic because of climate change. So there are many non-traditional threats, and beyond that also, like few people have discussed. In fact, it was largely missed out. So one need to think about that also, because okay, fine, we have all had seen that traditional threats are there, and a lot has been discussed on the traditional threats, human security, and those things. But unless and until we will expand the ambit of those threats, things will be largely meaningless things. So it is not like that the climate change will affect a particular country. It will affect everyone. So these things need to be discussed. Anyway, I open the floor for the questions. So are there any questions? So you can just write down in the chat box and whom it is addressed to.
Hello.
Hello.
Sir, am I audible? Into Kumar
Yeah,
Mehta.
yeah, you. Yeah,
Okay, sir, you have asked me question about the
yeah,
only mentioning of the only three countries, that is the
yeah,
China,
yeah,
Japan, and India. So
yeah.
I want to add the argument on that. So basically, I mentioned only these three countries. More importantly, just because nearly all the major power holders, except China, India, and Japan, condemn this crisis. Okay, so to make more stronghold in the South Asian region, so they are competing with with each other for the influencer. And why they are objecting the international response? This is because of their security concern and the economic concerns. So as we talk of the China
Mm-hmm.
continued to shield the Myanmar from accountability and scrutiny, obstructing the international action, weakening the UN measures. So China expanded its
Mm-hmm.
investment in the country. So two countries had signed an agreement on China and Myanmar economic corridor, which is basically a part of OBOR, that is the One Belt and One Road initiative, which is linking the Yuan province to the Indian Ocean. So in context of
Mm-hmm.
Japan, basically I have one reason. So it may be the one of the reasons why Japan supporting the Myanmar. So Myanmar offered the Myanmar offered the starving
Yeah.
Japanese people affordable rice in the early 1950s. Okay, when Japan was struggling to recover from the World War II, and Japan is paying the people back by supporting Myanmar apartheid regime against the Rohingya. So it is just one of the reasons. Okay, so there may be another reasons, that is the geopolitical interest, and Japan is also giving the billions of donations to the Myanmar. So on the thirdly, in the in case of India, a combination of factors appear to have framed the India's approach. So India took the sides of Myanmar government because it was derailed that raising the issue publicly might jostle the Myanmar towards the China. So India has also economic concern, such as the stakes in the Sui gas field of the coast of Rakhine State and the Situate port development project. So India is serious that instability in the Rakhine State would have a baneful effect on these concerns. So apart from these all geopolitics and humanitarian concerns and the non-interference in the internal affairs, other factors appear to have driven the Indian approach. Basically, the growing security concern and the need for the diplomatic balancing between the Bangladesh and Myanmar. So here, Bangladesh authorities have claimed that at least 14 criminal groups are active in the Rohingya refugees camps. So of which are reportedly linked to Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, which is basically named after the Hakim Baini, which is has a name Hakim Baini, which is named after the Abdul Hakim. Okay, so here Rohingya refugees from the Rakhine State, and Al Qaeda is also exploiting the Rohingya crisis by framing it within the Islamic eschatological narrative known as the Ghazwat ul Hind. It means the battle in the Indian subcontinent. So these are the basic, economic and security questions. For these concerns, all the three countries are struggling with each other to influence and stronghold in the South Asian regions. So except these countries, all countries condemn the situation of refugee, this Rohingya crisis, sir.
So, like, why Gamibia brought the case before ICJ? Why not other countries like France, Germany, or any Islamic countries? For example, UAE, Saudi Arabia brought that to ICJ. Like, do you have any explanation for that?
Yes, sir. Basically, the Islamic countries have put up the issue because, as we know that, basically 1 minute. So, as we know that the Rohingyas are the descendants of Arab traders. Okay, but Myanmar government is a predominantly Buddhist country, denying the Rohingya citizenship. It sees them as an illegal migrant from.
You are not getting my question. My point is, why Gamibia brought the case of genocide before ICJ? Why not some Islamic countries? If everyone condemned the case, why not Arab countries like UAE, Saudi Arabia, the custodian of Islam, or for that matter, Iran brought the case before ICJ? Why Gamibia has to bring the case before ICJ?
Also, Gambia has brought a case against the state of Myanmar last year, I think somewhere in 2019, on behalf of the OIC countries. So the case that Gambia filed had the backing of those Islamic countries. And as far as the Netherlands,
exactly my point. My point is, why not the Saudi Arabia is being the face of it?
So Saudi Arabia is far too embroiled. He doesn't believe that if it doesn't matter to Saudi Arabia to be directly filing a case. It's not in its somehow its strategic interest. It's more embroiled right now in dealing with its own crisis, in somehow bettering its relationship with Israel than be trying to do anything to solve the crisis.
So exactly, everything boiled down to geopolitics and your strategic interest.
Yes. Yes, so because even the permanent members of the UNSC are not interfering right now in Myanmar the way they ought to, because there is no, for example, an oil crisis. Like in the case of Iraq, they interfered on the pretext of human rights violations being committed by Saddam Hussein because there was oil there, which is what the United States needs. So unless the oil suddenly appears in Myanmar, permanent members of the UNSC will not interfere. They have never interfered. The past two major genocides that I mentioned, the one in Bosnia and the one in Rwanda.
Myanmar has one of the biggest gas reserves in the region. Yet to be explored, that is done by China, but they are one of the biggest gas reserves in the region. Anyway, are there any questions from the audiences? You can write it down. You can ask directly if you want.
Hello.
Yeah, Tanveer.
Yes, sir.
Introduce yourself and to whom your question is directed to.
Sir, my question is to Pintu Kumar. Sir, since he speak about Rohingya ethnic cleansing, sir, given the geopolitical developments in the South Asia, sir, are we seeing in the coming future that human rights violations would be sidelined with geopolitical interests? The way he was saying that there are security and economic interests at stake, and nobody is speaking like India, China, or other neighboring countries. Are we seeing in the coming future that more and more ethnic cleansing will happen with minorities?
Very nice question. Very nice. Pintu, yeah, Pintu, do you have to say anything? Like what Tanveer is saying, because you are defending, not defending, because you are proposing an idea that they are not saying anything and not condemning because of the strategic interest. So he's saying in future, we will see more of the genocides and the cleansing of the ethnic cleansing, because people are like the countries are more interested in strategic interest or the geopolitical interest. So what is take on it? It's a very interesting question.
Yes, sir. So, I want to add on these questions that, so, between the human right violation and the geopolitics, so I will say that on the most part, geopolitics will matter a lot. Okay, But I am not supporting this issue. I am not supporting the geopolitical stance. I am supporting that is the human
No,
right
no, no.
violation.
1 minute. Into 1 minute. Yeah, I guess I have to intervene in there. He is not asking your support. I also of the view you are not supporting it. What he is saying, since countries have showed their response in a way that constitute that okay, they geopolitics matter more than the human rights. So
Yes,
what he is saying, if the trend continues, will will we see more of the ethnic cleansing in the future?
yes, sir. Of course, sir. If the countries will focus on the more on the geopolitical issues, it will it will rise the human right violations more.
So we will see more of the ethnic cleansing in the future.
Yes, sir. This is if we cannot come out with the comprehensive strategy, so it has the chances of more human right violations. So not more type of ethnic cleansing, but less short of than that.
Okay, fine. Are there any more questions?
Sir, I have one more question to Ahmad from Afghanistan.
Yeah. Ahmad, you have to answer my question as well, so I'll club this with you. Okay, fine. Ask.
Sir, since he talked about financing the terrorism and he said that we should go for the cause of financing the terror groups. So my question to him is what about the puppet governments that have been installed by the Western world or powerful countries in order to serve their interests and bridging more alienation and giving more rise to terrorism? How he sees this? Since I am not
Okay.
in line with his definition of terrorism, there are many definitions of
Okay, I got it.
terrorism. I think he talked about this Afghanistan, Sikhs and Hindus like that.
Yeah. Hindus and
Yeah.
Sikhs of Afghanistan. Yeah.
Yeah, sir, can you throw light about what after the CA and NRC that India have adopted? There were huge.
Okay, fine.
Yeah,
Pulkit,
actually,
can you?
there was a lot of hue and cry regarding the implementation of CAA and what has been regarding the enforcement of CAA. But what I have read from the news reports, I haven't interviewed any Afghani, but what I have read is that there are opinions. If you see the interviews on the Wire or the print, I have seen those interviews. Those people are saying that they have a hope that Hindu and Sikh will get a citizenship. Beside that debate upon whether it is discriminatory or not, I will only say that yeah, they see a ray of hope. Because I just conclude to that.
No. What he is saying, like, it's not about that, like, sea of hope. And what I'm saying is, like, CA is in its regards a better thing. Like, they are 0.3% of population, total population in the
Yes, sir.
Afghanistan. That come around somewhere 9 lakh. But if you see the staggering number of refugees, they are almost like 3 million.
Yes, sir.
So, like, don't you think it's a discriminatory in that sense? Because already there are 3 million sufferers. Don't see them as a religion or Hindu, Sikhs, or the Islam, but 3 million sufferers are there. So if you just if you just make the life better of some sufferers, that is Hindu and Sikhs. So, like, should be like they are the sufferers? They should be given citizenship rather than on the basis of religion, like Hindu and Sikhs.
It should be based on kind of fleeing from violence or pursuit. They should be into that category only. It should not be based on religion. It actually should not be.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is, as a matter of fact, it is based on religion. We have seen that it is based on religion. So, but I am giving their opinion only that what I have studied. So that's it only.
Okay. Ahmad, you are here. Can you hear me, Ahmad? Ahmad, unmute yourself.
Yeah.
There's a question from Tanveer. Tanveer, ask your question again.
Sir, Assalamu alaikum, Ahmad, sir.
Wa alaikum salam.
Sir, my question is about, since you talk about financing the terrorism.
Yes.
As a root cause for terrorist activities. Sir, my question is, what about the puppet governments that have been installed in the terrorist hit countries and that are serving the Western world or Western interests or powerful countries, and they have created a gap, and we can say that created an alienation and giving rise to more terrorism. What is terrorist for West is freedom fighter for we people. If we have seen, I am from Kashmir actually, so I am asking this question.
Sorry, I didn't get your question properly. Can you just
it's
summarize it?
more or less, Ahmad, it's more or less the extension of my question. Like, how do you define, like, that for me, those who are a freedom fighter can be a terrorist for you? Since he is from Kashmir,
and
he
the
has to
puppet
face it
government.
more of it.
So,
And the puppet governments which are
installed by the governments. If we see the government in Afghanistan or government in other countries, they are giving
Iraq.
more information and creating more terrorism.
So, yeah, I got your question. First of all, let me answer your question, sir. You said, what is the definition of this term? You mean the terrorism? The common definition, as we know better, is the using of violence and threat to just get the political purpose, for the political purpose. But as far as my perspective is concerned, whoever use violence, threat, or whatever to just create an environment of fairness among the people or among the common people to get their interest, whatever the interest would be, whether it be economic interest, whether it be political interest, whatever. And that's the terrorist, I think. Why I'm calling the IS, for example, the other terrorist group like TTP, like LET or ETIM or and etc. the terrorists, because they are using the IEDs, the bomb blasts, the suicide bombers, the car blasts, these things in order to just create an environment of fear among the nations, and that fear would curse the government to accept their demands, to accept, to share the power. Now, currently, I'm not sure you're aware, yesterday we just began a negotiation between Afghan peace talks in Doha, in Qatar, between the Afghan government and the Taliban. Now Taliban came to the table and just said, okay, we have done these things. Our aim is to just create a shared government. So they used the violence, the threat. If you see the history of 2 decades, last 2 decades, see the much more violence which have done is by Taliban. They are using bombs, they are using suicide bombers, they damage and they ruined the country all over. And I'm just coming to the answer of my brother Tanvir. He said that maybe some Western countries are installing their puppet governments in the region or in other regions. So the people who are fighting that puppet government, freedom fighters, or maybe the government who is fighting, they are not legitimate. But I'm telling you that the government here in Afghanistan, the legitimate and elected government of Afghanistan, we had 4 elections from the government is legitimate. The people have voted for them. We have a healthcare system. We had a functioning health, what we can say, education system. Whatever we can see, we have the freedom of movement. We have the freedom of speech. I think your question belongs that why USA is here. Why USA is, for example, supporting the government? It's because of the BSA's bilateral security agreement, which was signed in 2014 between the government of Afghanistan and the international community, which led by the United States of America. So, based on this BSA, the United States are here and till 2024. After that, they will leave the country. We don't need them, and the government is not, in their benefits. Whoever fighting against the government, they are, as we know better, if we refer to some, news, not news, just some research, independent research, we will see what is the main case in Afghanistan, why the people are, why these people are fighting. It's a proxy war, brother. It's not a civil war. It's not a war of freedom. It's a proxy war which these people are fighting on behalf of the, unfortunately, Pakistan.
Sir,
No, Tanvir, it's okay now. Like you can just.
sir, uh,
You have some more further clarification, Tanvir?
since US is talking with Taliban, Taliban was before some years, yeah, still it is on the terrorist lists. How do you define the scope of Taliban here? It was some days before a terrorist organization, and now US is engaging Taliban in order to leave from the Afghanistan. But it is not talking with the you called legitimate government. It is talking with Talibanis in Doha, in Russia, or other places.
No,
It is
why
not talking with,
US should talk with the government of Afghanistan? The government is it's a partner of US. We have a BSA. I told you we have a bilateral security agreement with USA.
sir.
We have
That is why I am. Sir, that is why I am telling you
No,
that.
Tanvir, no counter questions, please. Let him explain.
Okay.
Yeah, Ahmad.
You said why United States is talking with Taliban. For your kind information, Taliban was never a terrorist group from the side of United States. You know, they were not. They were not. Yeah, Al Qaeda was, and the other terrorist group was, because as far as United States perspective is concerned, they were thinking that Taliban is an internal issue of Afghanistan. We are not dealing with these guys. We are coming here. We have come here to just fight with the terrorism, with Al Qaeda, and whatever they are thinking. But as far as our perspective is concerned, we consider them as a terrorist because they are fighting against the legitimate government, an elected government of Afghanistan. And the second point is, US talked or negotiate with Taliban. It was there between them, because they were thinking that these Taliban are attacking on us, and we in 2001 we overthrew their government. So it is an issue. We should talk with Taliban on Doha, and they talked, and they just signed an agreement with Taliban. Now it is the intra-Afghan peace talks. The Afghan governments, the sides or the parties are sitting in Doha in Qatar. Yesterday we just inaugurated that session, and tomorrow will be the face-to-face discussion and negotiation between the Afghan government and the Taliban or TTA. And they will talk about the internal issues of Afghanistan, whether it be the system, the political system, whether it be the freedom, whether it be the human rights, whatever the things. Maybe
Okay.
I hope I should have answered your question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Paki, are there any questions?
No, sir. As of now, I cannot see any questions. So
Are there any more questions from anyone to anyone? So should we call off the session?
So it's absolutely your call. If you
Or
if you would
like
like
what's
to
the time?
push forward, you can. You've got half an hour more approximately, and if you would like to end the session here, it's up to you.
No, is there anyone who has to say something but they couldn't say because of the paucity of the time, or they want to respond to something?
Sir, are you listening me?
Yeah.
Sir, basically, I want your views on this Rohingya crisis. A little bit elaboration, please.
My view on Rohingya crisis. Okay. See, Rohingya crisis is basically ethnic cleansing, nothing more than that. But since Myanmar is in such a geopolitical juncture, so everyone wants to get a dividend out of it. So it is not a surprise that it was ruled by a military junta for so long, but yet no such contemptuous attempt has been ever done against by any country. Like many countries, they could have filed a case, they could have prosecuted Myanmar, but because of its geopolitical location, China always used it as a bargaining chip. So there's always a fear that if someone bring a case against Myanmar, Myanmar will go in the pockets of China or in the hands of China. So because of this bargaining chip, Myanmar has used its bargaining chip so wisely. So no matter what the ethnic cleansing was and so things, at most what they did was they stripped the Nobel Prize of Yang Suu Kyi. That's all they have done till now. No such what to say, any visual actions have been done till far, largely because of their geopolitical location and mainly because of their bargaining skills with China, vis-a-vis China, because it has one of the largest gas reserve in the region. If you want to have your Southeast Asia Belt Road with India, Myanmar is the most. You cannot discount Myanmar if you want to have a connectivity with Southeast Asia. At the same time, China, in the China Belt and Road Initiative, Myanmar is one of the most important countries geopolitically. Besides this, Myanmar has a big agriculture resources, agroforest resources. Like Myanmar is one of the biggest, producer of teak, wood and everything. So as a combination of their geopolitical location, their resources, their forestry, this all played into the hand of Myanmar. So they can indiscriminately kill Rohingyas and still got caught free. At most, Gambia has brought a case, after 10 years of the cleansing. So it is just a formality what I am saying, but still there's a hope that, okay, now Gambia has brought the case, 2 soldiers have been tried. So things will move in a better place. And after a COVID, China has been in a sim of isolation. China has been isolated, not isolated like Iran, but isolated in a way that China has badly dented its reputation. Because companies are moving away from China, and they just sanctions by US on China. So now the largest phone maker, Huawei, is already gone to number 3, and you don't know about the future of Huawei. So this COVID has exposed the vulnerability of every country. So in this time, can Myanmar use its chip as deftly as they used to do it before is a matter to see. So my take is, after this COVID, ethnic cleansing or the problem will be slowed down. Myanmar will be brought to justice, but only when. The question is when they will be brought to justice. Because now they cannot use the China card as easily they used to do before.
But sir, we are noticing that the Myanmar is objecting the every international response. So do you think that it has any end?
No, they will object. Obviously, Japan objected to every response in Japanese trial of the Japan, Tokyo trial. Germany is objected to everything in Nuremberg trial. Uganda objected to everything. So they will object. So what do you expect a country to like? They won't accept it. A country cannot accept it. Okay, if there is a different sort of government tomorrow, if the democracy prevails in Myanmar and different government come, because it's still the power is with the military junta, no matter what the government face of the government is, but the power is with military junta. Tomorrow, if there is a Truth and Reconciliation Committee in Myanmar, people powers come to the Myanmar, maybe they will accept the wrongdoing of the past. But as of now, what do you expect? They won't accept it. So it doesn't mean since they are not accepting it, it won't come to an end. It's not like that. It's not how the court functions.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Ahmad, final question to you, just from my side. Like, your definition of terrorism was use of force, use of violence, or threat of violence, isn't it? My question is, how do you define violence? Violence as just means physical violence, as means bombing or use of IEDs and like killing of people, or in a Gandhian sense, in terms of Gandhi, violence can be at your micro level also, even the violence of thought, where you put the life of other people in danger in terms of sanctions, threat of sanctions, everything. So if you see, by using sanctions and threat of sanctions, USA has made miserable life of 70 million Iranians. 70 million Iranians' life has made a hell for the last 40 years. So don't you think when the Iran say USA is the biggest terrorist organization, there is some merit in it?
Well,
No,
thank you for your question.
First, like, you have to define what do you mean by violence then?
Yeah, I got your question. My answer to that is that I'm talking in a macro level. When I'm defining the violence, I'm not, using the Gandhi's whatever definition was. I'm using the macro level. Whoever use the we can say the traditional definition of violence, and that's
I'll interrupt you. WHO and the UN, everyone has recognize that the violence of mind also, like mental violence, like when you are not allowed to live freely, when you are deprived of your freedom, when you are deprived of your choice, deprivation of capacity building, everything consists as a violence. Like even the UN have recognized it. So my point is, why don't you consider this as a violence?
Yeah, we are considering it as a violence in normal situation, but when we are in a war and in a fighting zone or in a battleground, the common definition of violence is different from the UN or what we WHO and other international organizations defines. So we are defining the violence in a traditional way. For example, we are defining the violence the way, for example, using the IDs, using the bomb blasts, killing the people, creating their environment. That those are our definition of violence. Is that your question, sir?
Fine, it's okay. So anyway, so now there are no questions.
And as far as your question about the Iran and United States concerned, I'm not thinking that Iran is the enemy of United States, because if you see the history of revolution of Iran in 1979, it was somehow who was the Imam Khomeini? He was a person who came from the France. He was not coming from the Saudi Arabia. He was not coming from other side of the board. So if you're judging or if you want to have a decision or a judgment about something else, let's go to the result of that action. For example, since 2001 or maybe early on, United States is imposing sanctions on Iran, but it has not worked yet, because you're not, in simple ways.
Have you been to Iran? Have you been to Iran? Have you been to Iran?
Yes.
Have you been to Iran?
Yes, I
have been. No, what I'm saying is, when you say it has not taken an effect, then I guess you are grossly wrong, because people's life are really in peril. Okay, Iran is a resilient country. It fought the sanctions bravely, but it has affected life in every walk of life. Like just a week ago, the currency was like 1,001. No, like my point is, like a week before, for $1 you used to get 140,000 riyals. After a week, it is 250,000 riyals. So over a week, just imagine the inflation. So like my point is not just violence in terms of violence. Every day their social life, their security, social security, everything is in jeopardy. And only one country is responsible for that. Only one country. So my point is, anyway, so now there's no further questions. I guess we have discussed enough. Still we have time. Someone has to make any remarks. If they think they couldn't make because of time, they can make. Otherwise, we'll call it the session.
I'm sorry to interrupt, sir, but there are 2 more questions in the chat box that were present.
To whom they are addressed to?
So they can be taken by any panelist. It's completely up to you, or the panelists. You can open the floor for all.
Okay,
the
who wants to say something on Bhutanese refugee? Manjima, can you say something on Bhutanese refugee crisis? Manjima.
Yes, am I audible?
Yeah, you are. So the question is like, say something on, throw light on Bhutanese refugee crisis.
The thing is, I'm not much aware about Bhutanese refugees, except I know that they are a group of this Nepali language speaking Bhutanese people.
Those who were expelled to Nepal, and now there are no Bhutanese refugees here because they have been to US, Australia and Canada. So they are the most well settled refugees, I guess.
So, and I would like to respond to your question here. Like, you had asked me a question earlier, right?
Yeah.
Yes, so I'd like to say that I think we were on the same page here. Like, I know that there have been 37 million people who were displaced after the global war on terror by US. So my topic was all about equitable sharing of responsibilities, not about why US, but why not US. It's not just about US, it's about all the developed countries. Like, if we trace all the roots of the present internal conflicts and civil wars that have been going on, you can trace it somewhere along to the proxy wars during the Cold War era, or back to the era of colonialism, when the entire Western discourse, which couldn't adapt heterogeneity and diversity, somehow had sown the seeds of divisive politics within us. So the present internal conflicts, which have been the reason behind the spiking number of refugees, they can be somewhere along traced to colonialism or the proxy war era of Cold War. So what I mean is that we need developed countries to take more responsibilities. And this is not just about refugees, it's also about climate change. Like we have always been hearing reports about how developed countries are responsible for like 79–80% of historical carbon footprints. But now who is being impacted by it? Mostly the developing countries, and we have lost both our chance to develop as well as our chance to live in a safe environment. So what we need is more equitable sharing of responsibilities and the developed countries to take up responsibility for what they have done. Thank you.
There's a question on racism and COVID. Racism and COVID, like who was the first paper presented from? Like first paper was from whom? Paki? Who has presented the first paper?
Mr. Waseem. It was Mr. Waseem.
So Waseem, would you like to respond to this? Racism and COVID. There's a question. Can you say something on racism and COVID?
Yeah, but look, the COVID-19 itself was not. It's not binary. It does not create binaries. It's sort of a universal form. But it has been initiated or directed towards a particular community, especially in if you look at the Indian scenario, what happened in Delhi in Jammu Masjid, where a particular Muslim community was targeted, that they were responsible for spreading the COVID-19 in India, and later on Mumbai High Court. They declared that they were not responsible for creating a mess or spreading this COVID-19. I think in other parts of the world, though it's not discriminatory in itself, but the people at the helm of affairs or the governments have made it in some sort or the other a discriminatory one.
Okay, so there is a question. How do all the panelists think about state terrorism? Is it a myth or a reality? Because when we look at the statement that one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. So can someone just elaborate on that?
I guess, Ahmad, you are the best person to deal with the issue. If anyone else want to respond to that apart from Ahmad. Okay, Paki, repeat the question.
What was the question?
Sure, sir. Sure.
She's repeating it.
Statement, when we look at the statement that one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist, would you mind elaborating on that? Also, how do you see terrorism in the post-COVID world? Will nuclear power be still a threat, because we're moving into a very digitalized world and it's a time of cyber attacks and all of that? So do you still consider nuclear power to be a threat?
She was talking about the state-sponsored terrorism.
Yes.
So, like, just elaborate a bit on state-sponsored terrorism, because now there are new forms of warfare, like cyber attacks and the technological warfare in the technological realm, where state has the upper hand. Then let's say, suppose on the non-traditional form of other traditional form of security, like combats. So, in a way where the technological warfare, state has the upper hand in terms of surveillance, in terms of cyber warfare. So what do you think about this new form of terrorism, or overall describe about the state terrorism at all?
I hope I got your question properly. But as far as this state-sponsored terrorism is concerned, it has a very common definition. Whatever state is sponsoring terrorism or supporting or giving them money, sanctuaries, hideout places, in order to gain their interest, their political interest, whatever it be economic interest on else, it is a state-sponsored terrorism. Like I give you an example of, for example, the terrorists who are fighting in Afghanistan. They are sponsored. They have sanctuaries. I told you they have sanctuaries. They have financing sources. They have the state are using them as an instrument of foreign policy. Like I told you, the Pakistani, that the IS leaders who were killed in Afghanistan, they were Pakistani origin terrorists. They were the people who were. Sorry, I can hear you, sir.
Let me put it in a different way. Recently, hello, can you hear me? Paki,
Yes,
can
yes,
you hear me?
yes, yes, I can hear.
My point is, let me put it in a different way. Recently, entire computer systems of Australia was hacked by some Chinese hackers, allegedly Chinese hackers, that has the support of state. This hacking has put Australia in jeopardy. Their public administrative system, their judicial system, their economic system came to a halt for 2 days. My point is, will this count as a terrorism? If it is counts as terrorism, it's a state is sponsored terrorism or not. And if it is state sponsored terrorism, it's a new form of terrorism with a technological warfare where state has the upper hand. So how can you address these issues?
Yes, this is a very good question. As we know better, we are living in a changing world. It's not, for example, the 2020 or the second decades of 21st century is not the 1990s, or it's not the 1980s. The definition of terrorism is completely different from the previous definitions. Now it's changing. You mentioned about the cyber attacks. You mentioned about the cyber warfare. This is all the new form of the terrorist, for example, warfare. So I agree with you that the situation is going to change. The changing will in fact impact on the new form of using the violence to gain their interest. But I just want to ask you a question, sir, because it wasn't in my mind when I was in China. I had some, talks with our Nepali friends. They couldn't answer me that properly. I just want to ask you, in 1919, the situation in Nepal, it was a civil war. What do you think? Was it a freedom fighters fighting against the government, or it wasn't like a civil war on that time?
It was a civil war, but like whether it is amount to terrorism, again, that's the question. Whether it's amount to terrorism.
The group who were fighting against the government, was there the terrorists or not?
Because it has a popular support. It has a popular support. The people were not outsiders. Like they were not exported from, say, Afghanistan or the Iran to fight in Syria. It were all the people from Nepal. They had certain grievance from the state. But okay, where the means were justified. For me, means were not justified. Like for me, I am a bit of a Gandhian type, you can say. For me, your means also justify your ends. So your means of an armed revolution is not justified. But yeah, again, it's a question whether it's a terrorism or not. Who will label it? Who has the authority to label it? Because see, your definition, they have used violence, the threat of violence. But again, there were people from the state who had certain genuine grievances from the state, from the like non so democratic monarchy state. So that's my problem. It's a very complex situation, very complex definition of terrorism.
But
so
unfortunately, sorry to interrupt you, but unfortunately, the situation in Afghanistan is completely different. The people who, for example, the people who were fighting against the Nepal government, they were, just the people of Nepal. They were just, the people who were the citizens of Nepal. But now the people who are fighting against us, there are 20 group of terrorists who are fighting against the government. Aside Taliban, we have other terrorist groups. They are from Pakistanis, the Chechens, the Uyghurs, the Turkmens, the Tajiks. These people are fighting. So the definition of terrorism from our perspective is completely different, because they are not, our citizens. They are fighting in the way of proxies. They are the proxies of unfortunately our region's country and international some international countries.
So, Paki, are there any more questions?
No, sir. I guess it's high time that we wrap up the session. We have to prepare for the next session.
Thanks, everyone. Like, it was a way enriching for me. I don't know about you, but I have learned a lot. So I thank everyone for this, a very fruitful session. A special thanks to Paki for coordinating this, because I could have not done myself, because I'm a bit technically challenged. And a special thanks to Ahmad for taking the brunt of all the questions, and all the participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Distinguished speakers, chair, and ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the end of the 14th session, it's my honor to propose a word of thanks on behalf of NICE to all those who have graced us with their presence and contributed their parts to make this event a resounding success. First of all, we would like to express our gratitude and sincere thanks to Dr. Rachit for agreeing to chair and moderate the session today. Our sincere thanks also goes to all the speakers for being a part of the event and delivering such comprehensive and convincing presentations within a very short period of time provided to them. We're really honored to have you all as speakers with us today. We would also like to acknowledge our gratitude to our friends from the diplomatic community, experts, academia, media, and different organizations. Finally, I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for our audience who participated in the webinar and those who are watching this live on our YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your valuable time and attention and for making this session productive with your questions. We're truly blessed to have you all with us this morning, and we hope to stay connected with you in future as well. It's really been a pleasure. Also, do join us in the next session. Thanks a lot. Thank you.